We are here at the EA Showcase in Copenhagen with Yashir Qureshi from EA to talk about Need for Speed The Run. Black Box has been not doing Need for Speed for a little while, with Criterion doing Hot Pursuit and some other guys doing a Shift. What's it been like being away?
I don't think Black Box have ever been away. I think EA kind of recognised that we put them under considerable pressure to produce a Need for Speed every year. And it was really a case of we need to give those guys a break, and then we also need to kind of bring some new energy as well to the franchise, and we did that with Hot Pursuit. You know, we brought something which people really liked, you know, that sort of 89 Metacritic game. And so Black Box has had the time to really spend, you know, working with Frostbite 2 and a new technology, working with the ideas they had for Need for Speed for a while, and to bring this vision of the run to the fore now. So yeah, they've enjoyed it, and they've really put their, you know, sort of effort and heart and soul into this as well. And the sort of Black Box that you're thinking about with sort of Undercover and sort of previous ones as well has to some extent also changed as well. So there's been a refocusing, and they've really re-energized for this title as well.
Speaking of Frostbite, that's obviously the engine that's powering Battlefield 3, which everybody's talking about, and that seems to me like that's a shooting game engine. What's it like trying to work that into a driving game? It has to be a challenge, I guess.
It's not a shooting game engine. If you look at sort of other engines, for example, like say, you know, sort of Ego engine that Codemasters have, various other engines, they're used for different purposes, and it's the same thing with Frostbite. But the one thing that Frostbite gives us is the sort of next level of kind of realism in that it's a very, very malleable and flexible tool for developers. It's very, very powerful. The one thing that it's done with the Run is it's allowed us to build the biggest Need for Speed game that's ever been created. You know, we've got over 300 kilometers of road. It's 3 times the length of a Hot Pursuit, just by comparison, and it allows you to bring in different environments. As you've seen yourself, you play Desert Hills, you play Independence Pass, you saw the Chicago level at E3, and those are just small glimpses of a sort of huge environment. So it's brought a lot of benefits to it as well. They aren't really challenges per se, it's really kind of looking at it and thinking, our vision for a game has always been this, what does Frostbite allow us to do? And then you realise it allows you to do a hell of a lot more than you thought at the beginning, and that's why that was a sort of that was the impetus and focus it gave for the Run.
I want to talk about the story a little bit, because there's a story to the game, obviously, and there's something about a cross-country race, but I don't really know anything more than that. What's the setup here?
So think of your sort of classic Hollywood film, you know, sort of road trip across America, and I'm sure you've seen various other films like that, Cannonball Run, and there are various other inspirations that are in popular culture. But what we decided to do was to sort of take that concept on its head and say, right, okay, it's a road trip across America, but we're going to do it slightly differently. What if this was like a sort of Michael Bay, Jerry Bruckheimer produced sort of action blockbuster? How would that come about for a game? And so that's the basis that the team at Black Box took and said, right, that's what we're going to run with. And the story is all about this sort of character called Jack, and it's about really this sort of race for his life. You know, he's really got a this sort of race is all about racing against 200 other racers, and at the beginning of the game he finds himself in a difficult situation, which I won't spoil for anyone, but he finds himself in a difficult situation, and he finds that his only way out of it is to participate in this sort of illegal underground race. But the key thing about this race is that it's not just any old race. There are 200 racers all brought over from all different parts of the world, and they're the best underground racers there, and it's all for one big payout. You know, if you win the race, you get $225 million as a reward. So that's his motivation, and that's your motivation when you're playing the game as well. You'll find yourself in different situations, scenarios, different variety in terms of environments. You'll be driving across ice, sand, you know, desert environments, tarmac, and so on as well. You'll be racing in different situations. So sometimes you'll be racing just against one person. Another time you'll be racing against 10, perhaps more racers, all in one area. So there are lots of different challenges that allows us to sort of provide, and the story is a sort of key element of the game. It really brings the narrative through.
The E3 demo had that chopper chase, and the Gamescom demo has shooting of mountains and avalanches and all that stuff. What's the sort of mix going to be between the type of heavy scripted races and the more pure racing type races?
So, in terms of sort of scripted events, I think is sort of one thing you're focusing on, and then I guess just sort of traditional races where you're racing just flat out against other people. There isn't so much a sort of split in terms of it. We have different types. So I mean, I would say, you know, sort of 70-30% of the game is like that. We really want those moments like when you have an avalanche chasing you, or when you've got a chopper gunning you down, to be those sort of signature moments that you remember out of the entire game. But then we also want all those races that you're racing with or racing through to be very, very memorable. So you've had a chance to play Desert Hills, and a lot of people at Gamescom had that was our demo there as well. And you found that that wasn't a traditional circuit-based race that you've traditionally seen. It's all about sort of racing in a classic Need for Speed sense. You know, racing against traffic, racing against 10 other guys who don't want to let you pass at any cost. It's not a case of you win, you win. It's a case of you win, you take the money. So they're all about knocking you off the side of a cliff. They're all about making sure that they ram you through to make sure it's a real challenge. So those sorts of traditional races, I wouldn't call them that necessarily. This is a kind of, you know, Need for Speed, I think, has kind of built its own kind of genre now, where you kind of expect fast cars, you know, you expect sort of sexy women, you expect this sort of like really intense experience, real sense of speed as you're going through the environment. And that's what we're trying to bring with it as well. And that's what fans have responded to and asked for ever since Most Wanted, Underground, and so on as well.
I played the Desert Hills level just before, and I was noticing the races I passed had like precision 144, 143, and the level I failed it a couple of times because I didn't pass 10 of them. Is it the sort of thing where your placement in the overall race is like really open when you enter a race like that? Could you technically maybe pass 20 cars and then get a better place in the overall storyline, or maybe?
No, so again, it's all part of making sure that we bring that narrative to you as well, and it has to be scripted in a certain sense as well. I think there's sometimes some negative connotations around scripting in that, you know, I want freedom. But in this sense, it's all about making sure that that experience you have when you're racing against a certain number of people in an event is the most intense you can face. So in certain situations it makes sense to have 10, certain situations only make sense to have 1. So we are bringing all of these parts into the game for a reason, and so, you know, that's why they're there. To sort of come back to that sort of initial idea about, you know, in terms of sort of traditional races and sort of scripted events and so on as well, the game is a real mix. So I think by the time that you've started it and you've finished the game, you're going to realise that actually you weren't, you know, there wasn't a real distinction for you between what the avalanche level was like and what another race was like. It's going to be a case of, wow, that was an experience, and that's what we're going for. It's to give you an experience, not you know, sort of like be a chef and say we're going to put 20% here, we're going to put 10% there. It's, does it work first of all for the level? If it works for the level, you know, we build on that, use that as a basis.
This is also the first, I think, Need for Speed game where you get to go on foot. How big of a part of the game is that?
So that's the whole on-foot sort of section, the whole QTE sort of situation. That's a very, very minimal part of the game. And really what we were trying to bring across with that is that it's a sort of innovative way of telling the story. The last thing that we want to do is for you to just sit back and watch cutscenes throughout the entire time, and, you know, people just look for the X button or whatever and just try and skip it. You want to get to the race. But again, it's all about making sure that you're fixed in that narrative, so that for not 1 second of the game do you feel safe in any way. So if you see a cutscene, you can tend to be a bit passive, like, you know, my character's not going to die here, you know, I'm fine. But where you're the one who's in control of whether or not he's running or whether or not he trips and falls, in the same way as there's like a sort of God of War brought QTEs as well. It's a similar way of what we're trying to do as well. It's got a mixed response. Some people like it, some people don't. But I think they've only seen a snapshot of it. In terms of the overall narrative, it's a very small part. You know, it's sort of like less than sort of 2-3 minutes of the entire experience. So it's not a very, very significant amount. But what it does do is it gives you those little breaks from the racing as well. But it still keeps you kind of going along.